Hello there, and thanks for joining me. I'm Corel Painter Master Aaron Rutten, and in this video I'm going to be critiquing some digital artwork from one of my students. This is an excellent painting by Richard Stalter. Richard is a student of many of my courses, and this particular painting was inspired by the cabin and mountain landscape painting course that I offer. And Richard also supports my channel over on patreon.com/AaronRutten. Thank you, Richard, for letting me critique your artwork in a video and share it with everyone here on YouTube. So first I want to mention that Richard gets extra credit here for his critique because he sent me the layered file, which has all of his layers, which you can see over here, and they're all very nicely organized, labeled, and grouped. So this is my first time kind of looking at the layers here, and if I wanted to find a particular area in this painting, let's say this tree in the foreground, I'll look here in birch group, and there it is, it's the birch tree. So excellent job creating layers here. And besides the layered document, which is really nice to have for the critique, Richard also sent me a slideshow of his progress, and I'll go ahead and show that over in the corner of the screen during the critique. So first of all, let's talk about all of the things that I like about this piece, and then after that I have a few suggestions on how this piece could be improved. To really appreciate this piece, you have to zoom in, and I'm going to zoom in to 100%. And you can see there is a ton of detail in this piece. I'll just kind of start over here, and I'll pan around a little bit. Look at all that detail on the tree. There's all these leaves there. There's the ivy, which I really like. There's the mill, which is in motion because it's spinning, and so he made it blurred. That was really, really wise there. I like that. I like the ducks hanging out. Look at all this detail in the grass and all these little plants. There's plants under the mill. The grass is very, very detailed. There might be a lot of custom image hose nozzles being used here, like on the rocks, for instance. And there's just a lot of room to explore here and look around. I like these barrels. And of course, the mill is just awesome. There's a lot of detail that went into this. And Richard really took what he learned in my cabin course and expanded upon that. And I can tell that he really learned a lot from that course. If we look over here, there's some other kinds of trees. Those look really nice. I really like the color scheme here. It's nice and bright and seasonal. And then if we go ahead and zoom out and we bring up our layout grid, you can see that Richard has done a good job of plotting out his composition. He has his barn mostly in these two sectors here in the middle. He has one of his trees in this area of interest. He has his other tree over here taking up these two areas, and then his mill and his water flow through this one. The path also has its own little area, and then the clouds have their own row up here. So it's almost like everything has its own place. It's a really nice example of a composition. Alright, so now that I've talked about what I like about this piece, I'm going to suggest a few things. And as always with my critiques, these are just my opinion on what I would do if this were my piece. So I'll just really quickly go through and just kind of annotate a couple places that I think could be improved. I think the clouds here need a little bit of work. This one in the foreground feels kind of soft, and these ones in the background feel a little bit chunkier, and they look a little bit different. They don't look like they're the same clouds going off into the distance. They look like they're two different kinds of clouds, which is fine because this might be, more of a storm cloud and these might be other kinds of clouds. But I think if this were my piece, I would try to balance them out a bit. I'd probably just blend the clouds a little bit by softening the background clouds and maybe sharpening the foreground clouds. Next is the roof here. It has a little bit of jagged edge, which is called aliasing, and that happens when you create diagonal lines. We'll take a look at how to clean that up. I also think it might look nice to kind of dent the edges a little more on this metal roof. The barn itself looks really nice and it has a lot of texture, but the color does look a little flat to me, so I would add a little bit of variation in there. I'll show you how to do that. The background is really what stands out the most to me. It feels way too sharp, and so I think if we blur the heck out of that background, it's for one going to draw more focus onto the barn and make the barn stand out more. And it'll also make those trees look a little more distant. Because as of now, I really like the colors and all of the shapes, but it looks too obvious to me that it was the Impressionist brush used. So maybe blurring it a little bit will take away some of that detail and make it blend in better. Over here on the mill, there's a nice shadow on the water, which I really like. I'll zoom in so you can see that better. And there should be a bit of a shadow up here, I would imagine, too, because this wall here is blocking the light, which is coming from this direction up here. And so there should be a little bit of a shadow there on the water, very similar to the shadow that's down here. While we're on the topic of shadows, let's move on down here. I like the shadow on this tree. It looks pretty good. However, on the water here, since the water's moving around so much, you really wouldn't be able to see such a clean, sharp shadow like that. If the water was still, you might. Now over here where it touches the duck is a little bit higher up than the water, so the shadow shouldn't go perfectly across the duck and the water like that. It should kind of go maybe up and over the duck and then down behind it. That'll help the duck look more three-dimensional. Same goes for this shadow over here. It might be broken up a little bit more, but that's up to you. And then we'll move on over here to the tree. I feel like the leaves look really good on this tree. It's a huge improvement over what I saw on your very first cabin painting. The only thing I think that could be better on this is to maybe have some branches that don't have any leaves on them, because there will be some branches where the leaves fall off. So you could put in a few of those. I noticed you did that on some of your other trees, but it might be good to do it here too. You could have more of a big trunk showing here, and then it can of course get covered up by some of the leaves, but just to show some of the inner parts of the tree would be nice. And then the last thing that I want to discuss is really kind of optional. It's just from experience, I know that when you have a really nice painting like this, this would be the perfect thing to print on a wrapped canvas. And on a wrapped canvas, you have the canvas that wraps around the edge. And so what happens is when you go to try to print this on the wrapped canvas, you find that everything outside of this red box here ends up wrapping around the edge. So bye-bye Mr. Duck, bye-bye Richard's signature. You lose part of this tree, that's not too bad. I don't think it really hurts much over here on the top and on the left, but definitely on the bottom and the right, you're losing some focal points. So you may want to consider when you're working on these paintings to reserve a little bit of the edges and not put too much there. You know, you could have moved that duck up a little bit to here and then move your signature up over here. And since everything's on layers, you could probably do that, but that's just a suggestion. So since I have all these nice layers here, I will go through and show you a few of the things that I went over. I know that Richard already has the skills to do a lot of the stuff I suggested without me having to actually show him, so I won't go over everything and make this video too long. But just for example's sake, let's do a few here since we have all these layers, because this is a rare treat for me. I usually get a flat image with no layers. So I want to look in the cloud and sky group. Very nicely labeled. We've got cloud far, cloud middle, cloud near. I like that. So I'm going to go to cloud far. I'm going to go to effects, focus, soften. I think I want to soften that quite a bit to set it back and make it look further away. I'll go to cloud middle, effects, focus, soften. I'm going to blur it less, but I want to take away some of that detail in it. I think that looks pretty good. I might go through with the diffuse blur and just blend it a little bit more just to make it a little less distinct. Then I'll go to the cloud near layer. I might sharpen that up a bit using the coarse oily blender. Wouldn't be the end of the world if a cloud went off the edge of the canvas there. That might kind of help it compositionally. I know I have a habit of trying to fit everything into the composition, and sometimes that looks kind of odd. But really, I just sharpen this up a bit so we can tell that it's really here in the foreground and it stands out from the clouds behind it. And then of course go through with the diffuse blur and soften it a bit more. And then along the bottom, you can feel free to blend it quite a bit. The bottom doesn't need to be too sharp. Might hit it with the coarse oily blender one more time and try to make it look like part of this cloud is kind of coming up in front of the other part. I think that improves the clouds a little bit. Next, I want to go to the trees far group. That's these here. I almost feel like I'm working on my own painting here because I know where everything is. So it looks like there's a lot of layers in this group. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and merge these layers into a single layer. And then I'll go to Effects, Focus, Soften. Now I want to soften these just enough to set them back, but not too much. It's up to you to decide how much you want to soften them, but instantly you can see that it makes all these foreground objects pop out more. It was a little bit crowded with everything going on, and so adding these different layers of focal depth kind of sets things back. Do that with far pines. I could merge those down and go to Effects, Focus, Soften. Blur them a little bit less since they're closer to the foreground. Let's take a look at the left bush group. I'm going to merge that down, and I'll soften it as well. I want to soften it less. And then rather than going to Effects, Focus, Soften, I'm going to blur this using the Blur Blender. And I just kind of want to blur the outer edge of it a bit, just to kind of put it out of focus on the edge there. That way it's not too sharp. I'm going to zoom into the roof now, and we'll take a look at that. That's in the building group. I'm going to go ahead and merge all the tin roof layers together. And we'll take a look at how to get rid of that aliasing, which is that jagged edge that you see here on the top edge of the roof. To do that, you can select the blur blender and simply just blur along that edge just to soften it a bit. Now you could do this to the edge of your shape before you shade it. That might be a little bit easier than doing it after. We could do it here on this line too to soften it a bit. But because your image is made of pixels, which are little squares, that's why you get these little jagged edges when you make diagonal lines. I think that looks pretty good, and then I might beat up those edges a little bit using Distorto, because I feel like they're a bit too perfect, and metal has a habit of rusting. If it's all rusty like this, the edges wouldn't be perfectly straight. There'd be little chunks that would have broken off. So, in my opinion, shouldn't be so perfect. It should be a little bit more weathered. I'm going to go to the left side of the barn, which is this layer here, and I'm going to vary that wood color a little bit. So I'm going to right click on that layer and choose Select Layer Content. I'm going to hide the selection with Control-Shift-H. I'll create a new layer. And then let's take a look at our watercolor brushes, because those are pretty fun to use on wood. I'm going to select the Wet Flow Map Fringe. You can use any kind of watercolor brush, but generally speaking, the real watercolor brushes work better. And we can pick a color here, maybe kind of a dirty brownish color. We'll paint in a little bit of that. Because we have our selection active, we don't have to worry about painting outside the barn. Might select some greenish colors here, put those in. Maybe some more reddish colors from the rust. Some darker grays and so on. Because this is real watercolor, it is a little processor intensive, and it will take some time to bleed and trickle and do its watercolor thing, so be patient. If you get sick of waiting, you can always click up here on Dry Watercolor Layer. That'll make it stop bleeding. Gel is very similar to Multiply. I'm going to reduce the opacity of that layer until I get something kind of like that. Now that might have been a little bit too colorful, so I'm going to go ahead and go to Effects, Tonal Control, Adjust Colors. I'll go ahead and commit this to an image layer since this is a watercolor layer. I don't want to shift the hue, I just want to reduce the saturation a bit. Click on OK, maybe increase the opacity of that layer. But you can see what it's doing here. It's creating some old stains and weathering on the barn, and now it's not all one single color. Maybe it doesn't need as much pink color and stuff like that. I can always select that layer, turn on Preserve Transparency, select more of a brownish color, and then just paint over that area there. Change it and make it a different color. Maybe deeper browns work better. If I wanted to, I could even go in there and turn off Preserve Transparency, and I could blend that if I wanted to give it a little more texture here and there. But I feel like adding stuff like that helps quite a bit to really age the wood. And that brings me to the end of this critique. Again, this is an excellent example of both a good landscape painting and a good painting for a critique, because it has all the layers, they're all very well organized, and it's easy for me to go and pick out an area and make a change to it, rather than having to do it the hard way working with a single layer document. So thank you again, Richard. I appreciate you sharing this with us. If you enjoyed this video, take a quick second to click the like button. And if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. I have more digital art tutorials and critiques like this. If you're interested in learning how to paint landscapes like this, check out my courses that are available on gumroad.com/Aaron Rutten. I have a brand new course that'll teach you how to paint a barn in 2-point perspective. And if you'd like me to critique your digital artwork, send it to me at aaronrutten@gmail.com. Hopefully you can send me a layered version like Richard did, but if not, I accept flat images as well. And make sure to include permission for me to use your artwork in a video critique. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.